So I'm going to move on now to our special guest tonight. He's been sitting back listening to us, but you are in for an absolute treat. We will probably run over. I'm looking at, I think this needs to be a longer meeting because you need to have time for your voice. If not, it's all rushed. And then that isn't a good experience. So Joyce and I and the rest of the team, we've been talking, and we definitely are going to extend the time for Awaken Your Voice. So what can I say about James Pogson? Probably not a lot. I have got a bio here, but do you know what? I'm not going to say anything because James Pogson can talk about himself much better than I can. And also, I'm ready for a laugh because we've had a tough week this week, and I'm sure you all have. And so, James, without further ado, please come to the stage and everybody give a warm welcome to James.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start. I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to start with a story. A true story, something that happened to me in the early 90s. Wasn't a happy ending. So it's early 1990s. I'd written a radio play. Fortunately, BBC took it up. I thought, oh, so I got a call from a BBC producer saying, read your play. I really like your writing. Come in and let's have a meeting. So I thought to myself, I'm in. BBC want me. Here we go. Go into the meeting now. She sits down. I could see my script in front of her. So she says, James, take a seat. I'm like, yeah, great. She said, I've read it. She goes, so tell me what it's about. And I'm thinking, hold on, but you've read it. You've called me for a meeting. I've come into the BBC and you're asking me what it's about. So I start telling her everything that's in the story. So I'm saying, this character does this and that. So she's looking at me and she says, no, James, don't tell me what's in it. I want to know what it's about. So I'm stunned thinking, well, I've just done that. Then their phone rings. She goes, oh, excuse me. So she's on the phone for a couple of minutes. So she leaves me there thinking. And then she puts down the phone and she looks up and she says, oh, you're still here? Yeah. I was like, what? And she said, James, word of advice. If you can't tell me what your story is about in 2 sentences, you don't know your story. And that was it. In front of a BBC producer, that was it. That was done. Meeting done. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I've written this play. She's called me in. She says, I don't want to hear about it. Tell me what it's about. So that's the first lesson. Any of you writing a story, they don't want to know what's in it if you can't tell them what it's about in 2 sentences or less. I'll give you an example. Everybody familiar with the Star Wars films? Yes? Anybody know what the Star Wars films are about? Good versus evil on a galaxy far, far away. That's it.
Yeah.
You know the film Rocky with Sylvester Stallone as the boxer? What's it about? It's about the American dream told from a boxer's perspective. That's it. Everybody knows what happens in it, but that's what it's about. Again, you know, remember the film Alien, Sigourney Weaver? The guys who pitched it to Hollywood said, Jaws in space. 3 words, sold it to Hollywood. Jaws in space. And they said, brilliant, tell us more. Then if you remember the tagline, in space, nobody hears you scream. That was it. So when it comes to storytelling, the reason why I call myself a narrative storyteller, because everybody's got stories. We've all got stories. We've grown up on stories. But narrative is the telling of the story. Do you remember the Irish comedian Frank Carson who used to be on TV in the 70s and the 80s? He had a catchphrase where he says, it's the way I tell them. It's the way he tells his jokes. His jokes were a bit corny, but it's the way you tell them. So when I'm looking at stories, I mean, I've written film, theatre, radio, I've had stories published. And that's why I call myself a storyteller. Because how you tell your story, especially if you have your own business, for example, that's still storytelling, but we call it sales and marketing. I've been a copywriter writing sales and marketing literature for the past 14 years. And that's another story. But it's still stories. It's still telling your story, but in a manner your intended audience can understand and respond to. Now, I've met people who have spent years and years writing a novel. And the first thing I'll say to someone is, so how does it end? And I said, I don't know yet. And I said, how can you spend all this time writing something and you didn't know how it ended when you began it? Because if you think about it, everyone here, you know how your day ends the moment you wake up. Because whether you go to bed in the early hours of the morning or before midnight, you know how your day ends before you begin it. So I don't understand how you don't know how your story ends before you begin it. For me, as a professional writer, I haven't had a job. This is going to be my 26th year as a freelancer. I don't understand spending all that time writing a story and not knowing how it ends before you begin it. Doesn't make sense to me. And if anyone's familiar with writing movie scripts, you get what's called a 1 or 2 page outline. But what they do, because the average film script is about 120 pages long. What they produce is a 30 to 40 page document called, wait for it, a narrative treatment, which is a breakdown of your whole film. Now, imagine if it takes you 2 or 3 years to write a film script, you hand it over to someone, let's say an editor like Olivia, and she says, this doesn't make sense on page 1. And you spent all those years writing it. I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather spend a year or so writing 30 pages of narrative treatments than I would spend 5 years of writing 120 pages and it being wrong from the first page. Do you agree with me? Can I see a show of hands?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So planning is key. So as I said before, we've all got stories. My question is, and it's not for you to answer to me now, are we telling the right stories? Are we writing or speaking to impress people, or are we writing or speaking to express something? What's your message? What's your story about? Even as an individual, whether you're in business or not, what's your story? Who are you? It's very deliberate that I describe myself as a Black British narrative storyteller. I'm talking to a lot of people in America. I'm talking to people in Africa. I'm talking to people in Europe. So I need them to know I'm British. As opposed to just, oh, so you're a black guy from the Caribbean. My parents are from the Caribbean, but I'm British. So especially I'm speaking directly to the black writers now. When I started writing, I always saw myself as a writer. It's the big producers and directors in the room who said, no, James, you're a black writer. And I always thought I was a writer who was black. And they said, no, you're a black writer. And it's like, oh, okay, great. So are there any opportunities for me as a black writer? No, because you're black. I'm like, hold on a minute. Come on. But it's funny how, white writers are never called white writers. They're just called writers. There's black theatre and there's theatre. Theatre is just white theatre, isn't it? Right? So I've made a point of saying, okay, I'm owning my blackness. And I think we need to own our identity, because there's people out there who will name you, identify you. Even if it's wrong, they'll say, at least it's something. And if they said to you, so what do you call yourself? And you just said, well, I'm just me. Then I says, well, I was right. I'm going to call you whatever I'm going to call you. So we need to own our own stories. So if you're introducing yourself to someone, you need to know how you want to present yourself. Otherwise, they will define you. And it happens a lot with kids. Kids get defined all the time. Especially black boys in particular. Oh, you're like criminals, you this, you that, and everything. And if you've got any black boys and your black boys can't articulate who they are, really, then the status quo will say, well, I was right. You are what I say you are. The same when it comes to your writing. Are you writing stories that best reflect you? Are you writing stories to enhance your business? Are you writing stories to express who you are as a person? So yeah, it'd be great if everyone here gets a book published. But I start with the essence of storytelling. Plot your story. Do you know your story? Are you telling the right story? There's a few people here who want to write children's books. How do you know that what you're actually putting together is a book and not a play or a poem or a film or a TV drama? How do you know? Have you explored the different genres? It depends. I mean, like I said, for me, it's about the focus of the story. And most of my stories, I work them out in my head first before I put pen to paper. And the other thing is, if you're looking at in terms of fiction and you're creating characters, here's what the professionals do. So let's say you've got a character and you say, my character does this and that. Somebody will say to you, okay, is your character left-handed or right-handed? What's your character's favorite color? If you don't know, then you don't know your character, and you certainly don't know your story. Because you as a person, you know whether you're left-handed or right-handed. You know what your favorite color is. So aren't you creating a realistic character for page, the stage, or the screen? So you should know. You should know your characters just as well as you know yourself. And I know some people are going to say, oh, but I've heard of these, you know, multimillionaire writers who just sit down and write it straight away. And it's all, well, good for them. Most of us mere mortals have to plan things out, right? We have to plan. And also, don't get bogged up in thinking that you've got to write it perfect first time. Because the art of writing is rewriting. And Olivia will tell you that as an editor, right? So rewrite. One of my pet peeves, I'll say, for example, is sentences that have more than 12 or 15 words in them. What's that about? I don't get it. Or people using words they don't normally use. Put up your the word. Good for you, Khan. Not me. Right? But how many times, especially when it comes to business, I have a bespoke business. What the hell is a bespoke business? What? Imagine, I said, if you're a parent, I have a bespoke child. And I have another bespoke child. Nobody uses the word bespoke. No. So big conversational, using your voice. Know your voice. And here's the other thing, though. If you've never had an opportunity to awaken your voice, see what I did there, Brenda? If you've never had an opportunity to awaken your voice, take time before you volunteer to speak somewhere or to talk, write about something or whatever. Who are you? What are you about? What makes you tick? What are your good traits and your bad traits? Know yourself before you even start to create another story. Because you don't want to be in a position where somebody, especially with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. I've been having lots of conversations with people on LinkedIn, especially a lot of black people. And they're saying what's tending to happen at the moment is their bosses will come to them as, you know, to say, look, you're black. You know, we've got a board of directors meeting. Can you speak on behalf of every black person in your organization? Because, you know, all black people, we all know each other, don't we? We're like Wakanda, aren't we? You know, we know each other. And 9 times out of 10, the black person who's been asked to speak doesn't like speaking in public, full stop. Not everybody does. So they might say, everything's fine with me. I don't need to say anything. What goes back to the board of directors is, I've just spoken to Susan and she represents every black person here. Everything's fine. We don't need to discuss anything. Word gets round that Susan didn't want to speak, then all of a sudden all the other black people turn on Susan because she's not representing them. That doesn't happen to white people. You know, Olivia's opinions different from Brenda's opinions, different from Karen's opinions, different from Zara's opinion. But all of a sudden, you know, if Joyce speaks for all black people. That's ridiculous. You know it's true. That's what happens. You know, so which is why it's important as an individual to know your narrative, because everyone has a similar story. I'll take the Windrush generation, you know, the Caribbeans who came over from 1948 to 1960. There is a similar story for most Caribbeans. We all have a different narrative. My parents are both from the same island of St. Kitts in the Caribbean, didn't meet each other until they came to England because they're from separate villages. My dad came here in 1957. My mum came here in 1960 as a 17-year-old. She was the only female on her boat that came over, and it took her 2 weeks to come over. So when you hear about the Windrush generation, different narratives. So that's why my pet peeve is when we're talking about race and racism, not every black person has the same experience. For example, I've never been arrested. I've worked in prisons doing creative writing, but never been locked up in a prison. I'm 51 years old. Should I be patting myself on the back for never being arrested, or should that just be the norm? You know, but for a lot of black guys my age, it's like, what, you've never been arrested? Like it's a rites of passage. Yeah. Well, you never killed anyone. What? You know, that kind of thing. It's like, what, you've never taken drugs? I've never smoked anything in my life. And I've had producers at the BBC say to me, James, I can't believe that. You must do. And I'm like, what do you mean? Because you're black. And I've said to them, how many black people do you know on a personal basis? Oh, we don't know any. And these are major figures in the BBC who are still working today. Yet telling me, when I was writing material about black characters, telling me, no, that character would be aggressive. That character would be a drug dealer. That character would beat his wife. And they would literally say, because they are black.
That's terrible.
Terrible, but true. So one of the things is, if you're going to, let's say, approach somebody like the BBC, the Channel 4, or the big publishers, don't be surprised if they have a stereotypical view of what your character should be. Even if you created a female character, and it goes, and let's say you created a female character who was an action figure, don't be surprised if somebody says, well, don't you think that's a man's job? You'll be surprised. Exactly. You're horrified, Brenda. You're horrified. But I'm telling you, as a black guy, I've written characters who are like law-abiding citizens, and it's like, well, I don't think he should be a law-abiding citizen. Why? Because he's black. And that's the explanation they'll give.
James, can I interrupt you there? Yeah. Because I'm Scottish. I get the same, when you look at movies and TV, how do they represent Scotsmen? Drunks, layabouts, wife beaters. So what I want to say, this is why this is about diversity and inclusion. I'm Scottish, and I've lived in, and my mother's English, and I've lived here in England, because this is Scotland, for 15 and a half years. And when I worked in education, there was hardly a day went by then I didn't get, if I had been black, it would have been a racist comment because I was Scottish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ramsey Nesbitt, yeah.
But you know, people talk about, oh, will the next Bond be black? I'll give you one good reason why he won't be black. Because James Bond has a license to kill by the government. Come on.
Let's give a round of applause to James.
Yay.
So humorous. I love it. I could listen to you all night.
Thank you.
When we met, James, Olivia and Zara and I and James, we had a 2-hour call. We couldn't get off it. And honest to God, my jaws were aching, my sides were sore, in a good way, because we were just laughing so much. You've got to admit, James knows how to tell a story. He held our attention. We were shaking our head, we were gasping, we were smiling. And, you know, and that's the secret of a great storyteller. They connect with us on an emotional level and take us on a roller coaster. And talking about human experiences and what we all have in common and the things we face, but also what's unique about us, and that we're not all the same. You mentioned myself, Zara, Karen, and Olivia, and you're right. We don't all think the same. And it's actually shocking to hear some of the things that you're saying. And that's one of the reasons we've got Awaken Your Voice, because we're here to listen to all the stories and understand each other, because it's through understanding that we grow and that we change and that we challenge the status quo. And we know, and particularly in the world of publishing, we've heard about the media and things, it's got to change. It's got to change. So, James, thank you very much. I'm going to open up the floor now. Anybody got a question for James?
James, have you, when you talk about the stereotypes, as an Asian woman, I'm assuming rightly that the stereotypes exist for all cultures. So is that why when I watch, when I was growing up, I'd watch something on TV with Asian people, and it was always, kind of, they had the accent, they had that identity crisis torn between, their idea of the land that they grew up in conflicting with their parents' ideals. Is that how they still see people?
Pretty much. See, I mean, it's interesting. You said you're Asian.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are we talking from an Indian background, Pakistani background, Bangladeshi background?
I'm Bengali, and that's my city. Yes,
right?
yes.
Right? You need to be clear. You need to be very specific. Because let's just say you're saying, yeah, but I'm an Asian female. And they're like, well, they're kind of ten a penny. And so you need to be very specific. If you're comfortable just saying you're an Asian writer, for example, say that. I would advise you say Bengali descent. Because somebody could turn around and say, oh, Mia Siao, you be like Mia Siao. Because she's an Asian writer.
The thing is, it doesn't, I suppose, because I don't relate to my parents. I'm third generation. So I could effectively say I don't relate to the national element. I relate to the ethnicity. So and that's what we were always brought up on, you're Bengali, you're Bengali. It's only when I went to school that the idea of Asianness was an umbrella. And when I learned about my history, I recognized that obviously up until 1947, Pakistan, Bangladesh didn't exist. They were all part of one country. So if someone did mistakenly or hold it to me that you're definitely Indian, it doesn't offend me. But then obviously India's made up of 28 states, and Bangladesh is one half of a former Indian state called Bengal. So after 47, the state of Bengal, which was divided into West Bengal and East Bengal, East Bengal became East Pakistan. And then in 71, with the Civil War, it then became Bangladesh. So I've had 3 generations of my family have 3 different passports, but technically we were born in the same land. So I connect with my ethnicity. And if you say I'm Asian, I fall under that umbrella. I'm comfortable with it. But specifically, if you said, well, what part of Asia? I'll say, well, I'm Bengali, so I have Indian heritage, but my ethnicity culturally is Bengali.
See, now you're talking personal narrative.
Yes.
That would sell you. See what I mean? That's your personal narrative.
Yeah.
We're connecting with that on an emotional level because we're hearing what you're saying. And when he said, I'm Asian, it's like, oh, okay, I know a lot of Asians. When you start talking about Bengali and everything, it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And it differentiates you as an individual. Yeah. And if you're going to put yourself in a marketplace, it differentiates you in a market. So if some publisher says to you, for example, what makes you different from all the other Asian female writers out there? You've already answered it to us.
Brilliant.
Can I add something to that? Can I add something? What you said about what you just said there, there's something that you just said, Nasima, that reminds me of something that James just spoke about. See, my dad is Windrush generation as well. He came in 1950, and he would have said Indian, and that's because he grew up knowing about, obviously Pakistan and Bangladesh were part of India at that time, and so and I think James probably you'd agree that our parents' age generation from the Caribbean tended to call what we would now say Asian people Indian because that's what they knew. That's what they were at the time. But also Asian's quite a new term too, when you think of it in that respect as well. And if you go to America and say Asian, their first thinking is actually Chinese.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Absolutely. So is what you're saying that the more specific you are, the more internationally individualized you are?
The more unique you are. You are your unique selling proposition. You know the Marks and Spencer's ads, when they say, this is not just a pie, this is a Marks and Spencer's pie. And you're thinking, oh my God, Marks and Spencer's pies are the best pies in the world until you buy one. My mum makes the best apple pies in the world. Just officially, my mum does. Right? So you need to be comfortable with who you are. And sometimes it needs an explanation from you to say, actually, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. Otherwise, people are going to make assumptions. And as I said, if you just said Asian writer, you're going to join a pile of lists of people saying, oh, Asian writer, and they'll go to the familiar Asian writer. But imagine if they're saying, oh, we had a commission lined up the other day and we were looking for someone of Bengali descent, but we didn't know anyone. And you'll say, what about me? Because, well, you've just said you're an Asian writer.
Mm-hmm.
Right, James, I've got a quick question. What about in terms of religion? Because my writing is non-fiction and I write for kids and teenagers, and it's more about social skills and spirituality. So I tend to quote a few scriptures, but it's also very, very practical with everyday examples as well. Right. But my thoughts are, if I put out there that is Christian, it might exclude other readers who might want to read it, but because it's Christian, they might not want to open it. Meanwhile, the information there is not out there to necessarily convert them to Christianity, but these are principles, life principles that will help everybody, regardless of their, religion or their background. Okay.
I'll introduce you to a marketing terminology. It's called sell the sizzle, not the sausage. Right?
Okay.
The sizzle,
if you can break that down.
Right,
please.
yes, I will. The sizzle is all the benefits people will get from reading your book.
Okay.
The sausage is from a Christian background or perspective. Right? Because unless you're selling predominantly to a Christian market, they don't want to hear that it's Christian. Right? Because if somebody said to you, as I said to you earlier, I've never smoked. Even if he said to me now, James, if you start smoking cigarettes, it's going to increase your IQ. On an emotional level, I'm thinking cigarettes. No, I'm not doing it. Right? So never underestimate the power of the emotional sell. If you know saying Christian is going to put people off on an emotional level, that's the sausage. Sell the sizzle. All people, whatever we do, we all think, what's in it for me? Everybody who logged on today thought to themselves, what's in it for me? That's why they logged on. So if you know, for example, the fundamentals of my teachings or whatever are Christian-based, but I don't want to ram Christianity down people's throats, what are the benefits? What's the sizzle of what you're doing? Don't get me wrong, if you get onto a Christian channel, they'll introduce you as a Christian author.
Yeah.
Right? But if you're looking for a mass appeal to say, sell the sizzle, the benefits, not the sausage.
Brilliant advice. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll take one more question for James, who would like to ask one more question.
I'll ask one.
Okay,
this is Rosalind. Hi. Do you suggest when you're writing, especially a non-fiction or fiction, I should say, do you need to? Is it better to write the ending first? Because I struggle immensely. I have lots of ideas, but but I struggle with writing everything down. So do you suggest like writing the ending first?
I would suggest plotting everything first. For example, yeah, do you know what particular genre you're writing? I know you're saying it's fiction, but is it action? Is it romance? Is it crime? Is it thriller? What is it?
It's more life skills. It's I'm not sure. I think it's kind of, because the idea I had is kind of bring together fairy stories, but in a practical life skills type of way, like fables, that sort of thing.
See, here's what I was talking about. If you as the author or would-be author can't define what you're talking about or the story that you're trying to come up with, you got a problem. Not a problem that can't be solved, but you got a problem. Imagine now if Brenda was in a situation to say, I've got £1 million contract here. It's yours. If 2 sentences, you can tell me what your story's about. You've kissed goodbye to £1 million. And that's not a criticism of you. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Right? So I would probably advise. So can you visualize certain chapters? Do you know how many chapters your book has? I'm taking it as a no.
I read.
I'm being straight with it. I'm taking it. It's a no. Okay, look at it this way. You know when you're hungry, most people keep the majority of their food in the kitchen, don't they? Yeah? So when you're hungry, you go into the kitchen. So the whole idea of going into the kitchen to eat is to no longer be hungry. So you know what's in your fridge and your cupboard, so you'll pick certain things. And you'll say, okay, I'm either going to make a sandwich or going to make something. So you know the ingredients to what you're going to eat. You need to know the ingredients of what's going to be in your book, whether it's chapter by chapter by chapter. You can jig about the chapters. You know, chapter 1 could be chapter 10. Well, unless you know what it's about, what are you doing? So I wouldn't even think about it as a book at the moment. Think about it as a story.
Story, okay.
You know, very quickly, when you go to this, if you watch a film, films have a beginning, middle, and end. Sometimes you watch a film, the beginning's good, the middle's amazing, the end's terrible. The last 20 minutes are terrible. Spoils the whole film, doesn't it? In the film world, we don't talk about happy endings or sad endings. We talk about a satisfactory ending. Now, my question to you would be, imagine somebody's read your book and have finished the final page. How would you like them to feel once they've read it?
Uplifted.
Don't tell me now, but how would you like them to feel? When you know that, work backwards.
Work backwards.
It's a bit like, I always say to people, the worst thing, that the analogy I use is too many people make a chocolate cake that has no chocolate in it. And then get upset when people say, I can't taste the chocolate, because there's no chocolate in it.